Proportional Response. Book 1, Chapter 14, Part 4. So Let It Be Written. Hannibal sat listening, completely engrossed in the tale of John the accountant. The human paused and took a drink from his wine, then his water, after he'd revealed that he and his pirate band had managed to capture an interstellar ship. He took advantage of the moment to look around the room and found everyone seemed just as wrapped up in the telling. Even the Duke and his wives, who, he felt sure, had heard it before, were on the edges of their seats. Henry worried him. He could see barely repressed rage in his usually calm friend, but Eldia had a hand on his, and that seemed to be helping. John looked up from his drinks and continued. "We armed that ship and became an even bigger problem for the authorities. They can't catch you when their ships are mostly sublight and you are not, so we could stay a lot longer over a target and do a lot more damage. We also took down nearly every FTL ship that entered the solar system. I didn't understand why we stayed in the system, nor his insistence on taking down FTL ships, nor the extreme mercy he showed to their crews. You see, the captain was an older guy, old enough that the Confederated Charter had not been banned from schools or the internet before he was old enough to read it. Daft bugger actually believed in the thing too, and that the Confederation would come in and save everyone if they found out what was going on. He had a plan, which he told no one until it was too late for us to do anything about it." Hannibal watched as John stopped and swirled his drink, then turned accusing eyes on Henry again. Henry, however, didn't notice as he was staring at his own drink. Hannibal cocked his head as he looked at his friend. When did he start wearing glasses? Wait, why are his fingers twitching on his other hand? Henry, you should be paying attention. He started to use his own comms to send Henry a message, but Euro subtly tapped his foot, then shook her head. He went back to watching Henry and decided to let it go. He'd seen Henry multitask before, reading and listening to someone, and decided it had to be important. "Your Confederation finally sent a destroyer group to deal with us. Came in nearly on top of us as we thought we'd captured another FTL ship. Captain's response puzzled me and chilled me to the bone. He laughed, shouted, 'Finally,' and then ordered us to surrender. You remember, I mentioned that slicer. He decrypted the comms channel between the destroyer captain and our patrol ships and caught the local patrol captain spouting a bunch of legal jargon, which amounted to an order for that warship to blow us out of the sky and kill any survivors." John took another pull from his wine and turned to face the wall. He continued to speak with his head down slightly, though he kept his voice loud enough to be heard. "The captain insisted we surrender anyway, but the crew wanted to run. There was terribly little time, and the mutiny was quick. Most of the crew wanted to kill him, but he suggested we put him in an escape pod instead. He would surrender to the Confederation, like he wanted, and we could go. Get away, get out of the system, find easier targets. We did exactly that. The mutiny and discussion had taken seconds, and in under a minute from the demand, a lone escape pod launched from our ship, to be promptly obliterated by Halistafar forces. That was all we needed. We ran, a blind jump to FTL on an already hot drive, our singularity formed in an instant, and we shot straight up from the ecliptic. Thankfully, it worked, and our engines took it with only minor protests. After we'd made our way to a nearby uninhabited system and found a place to hole up for a few hours, we decided that pirating in human space was just too risky and settled on the Venter as new targets. We hit a few freighters on the way, of course, but kept it low risk and tried to minimize the damage, except when we started to see patrol ships, of course." Henry made an angry noise, and John turned so rapidly to face him that Hannibal involuntarily pushed himself back in his chair. Vashna squeezed his hand. Whether she reacted in fear or to comfort him, he didn't know, but he found her presence reassuring. Somehow, fury painted John's face as he continued. "All of us grew up in a trap built by those who claimed to be righteous authority and enforced by patrol ships who claimed legitimacy. As far as we were concerned, anyone out to drag us back into those hellholes who stood between us and our vengeance was fair game." John's face softened a bit, and he broke Henry's gaze. Hannibal let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Those deaths, the deaths of those patrolmen, those are the only ones I regret. And even that I only regret provisionally. Right now, after meeting you, Henry, and the humans who swore for the Venture and work in the embassy. Henry cocked his head to the side, and a look of puzzlement came over his face. I talked to a few of those men about you. They said that you had been aloof at best, and more often downright hostile to them. Yet you say... John favored the room with a cold half-smile that sent a chill down Edible's spine. Observation and identification of who and what people are, and the ability to detect not just lies, but shades of truth, is a skill one learns quickly on Halas-Safar, or one does not survive. Those men puzzled me for a long time. They were honest, honorable, and straightforward. Yet they had no weakness to them, nor could they be fooled. So, yes, they are part of what convinced me to finally tell the Duke here what he has wanted to know. Why? Why did me and my men continue to pillage and fight so hard? Because we were trying to amass a fleet. All of us had scores to settle back home. Some functionary or other who needed to pay for... John's breath caught, and he looked up at nothing for a moment. His face betrayed no emotion, but they could all feel his struggle. When his voice returned, it carried the hardness of steel. Someone who needed to pay. We had resolved to bring the whole system crashing down, build a fleet of pirates as long as it took, and roll in like a wave, destroying everything in our path, cutting everything off, and taking over. John ducked his head and shook it slightly. It was going well, until... John gestured at Kasla, and his voice carried hints of respect and... grudging affection, maybe? This blue bastard found us. Kasla's wives all shot up in their seats, and Golnar appeared poised on the edge of violence, but Kasla just gave the man a cold but slightly amused smile and nodded, then relaxed back into his chair. His wives relaxed, by inches, but Edible felt sure that even Yoro had been ready to commit violence, or at least harsh words, which would have been nearly as surprising from her. All of you have probably read the reports of this crafty blue devil, and how he managed to catch me at a port, fight me to a standstill, and beat me until I stopped. I underestimated him, first time I'd done that in a very long time. Long story short, he decided to see to my reformation himself. I told him repeatedly he was wasting his time, but I knew the alternatives would be worse, so I went along. He laid some heavy punishments on me, of course, the chief of which was that I had to forgo my vengeance for whatever it was that drove me. Inibel looked around the room confused, and was met with confused looks from everyone except John and Kasla, who wore a look of revelation. To his surprise, it was Vashna who recovered first and spoke. Her voice rang with an authority that belayed her year. Wait, Mr. Smith, you said that you told this story for the first time yesterday, to the Duke here. She made a semi-dismissive gesture at Kasla, who seemed amused for some reason. Yet you tell us he forbade you your vengeance. How did he? Kasla leaned forward and interrupted her. When I found this man, he was a bright ball of naked fury, in a way I had never seen, hell-bent on going out in a blaze of glory, as you humans so eloquently put it, and taking as many of his enemies with him as he could. The trouble I had was that I did not know, until he came to me last night, just who those enemies were. Therefore, I set the commutation of his vengeance as a condition of his service, for a number of reasons, most of which I think should be obvious to everyone here. The Duke looked at John and raised an eyebrow. The man nodded in reply. Edible exchanged a look with Vashna, and they silently agreed that the man before them would probably already be dead otherwise. John turned from the Duke, and Edible braced himself as the human met his eyes and spoke. Yes, you and the young lady are right. Without that condition, I would already be dead. He huffed, set his glasses on the counter, turned to the Duke, and continued. In truth, even with the prescription, I have been, until this night, until you made me get on that list field and experience honor in a new way, still headed for that blaze of glory you spoke of. Enibel watched, intrigued, as John pulled a long breath, looked down at the floor, and let the breath out slowly. The human then went down to one knee and turned an earnest face up to the Duke. When you took me into your service, I lied. I in no way renounced my vengeance. I intended to stay by your side, learn, then be freed or escape, and go forth to do as I originally intended, better armed with both material and knowledge. Kaslor held up a single hand, and his features took on a soft cast. I know. Enibel started slightly, and he took a quick survey of the room. Henry stared off into space. He'd taken the glasses off and had a white-knuckled grip on his chair. His aunt had eyes only for Henry and whatever personal pain all this had wrought him. The rest of the women all held small, knowing smiles. John knelt there, total bewilderment on his face. "You knew? How?" The man looked down and to the right, then back up, his features now a cast of determination. "Of course you knew. And you probably had a second tracker on me that I didn't know about." He harumphed and got a far-off look in his eyes for a moment. "I should have known that. Still, I suppose it is hardly the only time I have underestimated you." Inibal leaned forward slightly. Why would he kneel to say these things? Where is he going with all this? He watched John bring his eyes back to the Duke and put one hand on the floor by his knee. "I, on my honor as a man, and on both the name to which I was born, which I now also renounce, and on the name we gave me, do forever renounce my vengeance against the enslaver classes of Halistafar." The man extended his hand, palm up, and spoke in earnest tones. "Will you accept my pledge?" The Duke leaned forward and placed his hand over John. "I accept your pledge and release you from your bound state. You are a free man again. I also accept you to my service as a free man for as long as you wish to remain." His wives stood and each put a hand on his shoulder. Inibal blinked as Vashna's hand twitched, like she wished to move, but she held her place. The three women looked down on John and intoned, "So let it be written, so let it be done."